Hi, sweet friends. Welcome back to another read aloud from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Last time we were together, we read the chapter about the chocolate room, and at the end of that chapter, Veruca Salt is heard screaming. Everyone turns to look, and Augustus Gloop, the very large boy who eats way too much sweets, is sitting there laying at the edge of the river, lapping up chocolate with his hand and drinking it. Would you want someone else's hands in your chocolate? Probably not, but he's doing that, and we hear his mother say, "I don't think you should do that." So, let's see what happens in chapter 17. Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. Take a moment. Think, what do you think is going to happen with Augustus going up a pipe? Do you have an idea in your brain? All right, let's see what happens. Here we go. Chapter 17, Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned around and saw Augustus Gloop and what he was doing, he cried out, "Oh no! Augustus, please! I beg you not to do that. My chocolate must be untouched by human hands." "Augustus," called out Mrs. Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that river at once." "This stuff is fabulous," said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Gosh, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down and wagging his stick in the air, "you must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus," cried Mr. Gloop. But Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now lying full length on the ground with his head far over the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. Instead of using his hand now, he's just licking the river. Ew! "Augustus," shouted Mrs. Gloop, "you'll be giving that nasty cold of yours to about 1,000,000 people all over the country." "Be careful, Augustus," shouted Mr. Gloop. "You're leaning out too far." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek, and a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop. And in 1 second, he disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" screamed Mrs. Gloop, going white in the face and waving her umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim a yard! Save him! Save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop, "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." Augustus Gloop's face came up again to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. "Help! Help! Help!" he yelled. "Fish me out!" So look, do you see Augustus covered in chocolate? In your brain, did you see this happening when he was laying out over the river? It was bound to happen eventually, I'm afraid. "Don't just stand there," Mrs. Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something." "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the wretched boy began being sucked closer and closer toward the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down above the river. Then, all at once, the powerful suction took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the river bank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. "There he goes!" someone shouted, pointing upward. And sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could clearly be seen shooting up inside, head first like a torpedo. "Help! Murder! Police!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once! Where are you going?" Now, do you think Augustus knows where he's going? Augustus has no idea. "It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that pipe is big enough for him to go through it." It isn't big enough," said Charlie Bucket. "Oh dear, look. He's slowing down." "So he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to stick," said Charlie. "I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. "By golly, he has stuck," said Charlie. "It's his stomach that's done it," said Mr. Gloop. "He's blocked the whole pipe," said Grandpa Joe. "Smash the pipe!" yelled Mrs. Gloop, still waving her umbrella. "Augustus, come out of there at once!" Again, "Can he just come out of the pipe?" His mom's kind of silly. The watchers below could see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe, and they could see it building up behind him in a solid mass, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give, and that something was Augustus. Woof! Up he shot again like a bullet in the barrel of a gun. "He's disappeared!" yelled Mrs. Gloop. "Where does that pipe go? Quick, call the fire brigade!" "Keep calm," cried Mr. Wonka. "Keep calm, my dear lady, keep calm. There is no danger whatsoever. Augustus has gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey, but he'll come out of it just fine. You wait and see." "How can he possibly come out just fine?" snapped Mrs. Gloop. "He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds. "Impossible!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Unthinkable, inconceivable, absurd. He could never be made into marshmallows." "And why not, I ask?" shouted Mrs. Gloop. "Because the pipe doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make the most delicious kind of strawberry-flavored, chocolate-coated fudge." "Then he'll be made into strawberry-flavored, chocolate-coated fudge!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Oh, my poor Augustus! They'll be selling him by the pound all over the country tomorrow morning." "Quite right," said Mr. Gloop. "I know I'm right," said Mrs. Gloop. "It's beyond a joke," said Mr. Gloop. "Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Just look at him. He's laughing his head off. How dare you laugh like that when my boy has just gone up that pipe? You monster!" she shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she was going to run it through him. "You don't think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy up into your fudge room like that is one great big colossal joke?" "He'll be perfectly safe," said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. "He'll be chocolate fudge!" shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "Never!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Of course he will!" shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "I wouldn't allow it," said Mr. Wonka. "And why not?" shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "Because the taste would be terrible," said Mr. Wonka. "Just imagine it. Augustus flavored, chocolate-coated Gloop. No one would buy it." "They most certainly would!" cried Mr. Gloop indignantly. "Oh, I don't want to think about it," shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "Nor do I," said Mr. Wonka, "and I do promise you, madam, that your darling boy is perfectly safe." "If he's perfectly safe, then where is he?" snapped Mrs. Gloop. "Lead me to him this instant." Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, click. 3 times. Immediately, an Oompa Loompa appeared, as if from nowhere, and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair was golden brown, and the top of his head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. "Now listen to me," said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. "I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them find their son Augustus. He's just gone up the pipe." The Oompa Loompa took one look at Mrs. Gloop and exploded into laughter. "Oh, do be quiet," said Mr. Wonka. "Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop does not think this is funny at all." "You can say that again," said Mrs. Gloop. So look, here she is, Augustus's mom. Here's Mr. Wonka, and here is the Oompa Loompa that he's telling to take her to the fudge room. It is kind of funny. "Go straight to the fudge room," Mr. Wonka said to the Oompa Loompa, "and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside of the chocolate mixing barrel. I'm almost certain you'll find him in there. But you better look sharp, and you'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's liable to get poured into the fudge boiler, and that would really be a disaster, wouldn't it? My fudge would become quite unedible. Mrs. Gloop let out a shriek of fury. "I'm joking," said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. "I didn't mean it. Forgive me. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop and Mr. Gloop. Goodbye. I'll see you later." As Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and their tiny escort hurried away, the 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing about and beating wildly upon a number of very small drums. "Augustus Gloop," they chanted. "Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop." "Grandpa," cried Charlie. "Listen to them, Grandpa. What are they doing?" "Shh," whispered Grandpa Joe. "I think they're going to sing us a song." So look, here's the Oompa Loompas on the other side of the river. "Augustus Gloop," chanted the Oompa Loompas. "Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, the great big greedy nincompoop. How long could we allow this beast to gorge and guzzle, feed and feast on everything he wanted to? Great Scott, it simply wouldn't do. However long this pig might live, we're positive he'd never give even the smallest bit of fun or happiness to anyone. So what we do in cases such as this, we use the gentle touch, and carefully we take the brat and turn him into something that will give great pleasure to us all. A doll, for instance, or a ball, or marbles, or a rocking horse. But this revolting boy, of course, was so unutterably vile, so greedy, foul, and infantile, he left a most disgusting taste inside our mouths, and so in haste we chose a thing that, come what may, would take the nasty taste away. "Come on," we cried, "the time is right. Send him shooting up the pipe. He has to go, it has to be, and very soon he's going to see. Inside the room to which he's gone, some funny things are going on. But don't, dear children, be alarmed. Augustus Gloop will not be harmed. Although, of course, we must admit he will be altered quite a bit. He'll be quite changed from what he's been when he goes through the fudge machine. Slowly the wheels go round and round, the cogs begin to grind and pound. The 100 knives go slice, slice, slice. We add some sugar, cream, and spice. We boil him for a minute more until we're absolutely sure that all the greed and all the gall is boiled away for once and all. Then out he comes, and now, by grace, a miracle has taken place. This boy who only just before was loathed by men from shore to shore, this greedy brute, this louse's ear, is loved by people everywhere. For who could hate or bear a grudge against a luscious bit of fudge? Now, their song, they're making it up, right? It's kind of supposed to be a joke about what has happened to Augustus and what they think of him. They don't think that he's a very nice person because he's very greedy and takes way more than what he should. And so they are saying that what has happened to him, the next time the children and their parents and Mr. Wonka see him, he will be a changed person. What do you think that means? How will Augustus have changed? Let's finish this chapter. We're almost done. "I told you they love singing," cried Mr. Wonka. "Aren't they delightful? Aren't they charming? But you mustn't believe a word they said. It's all nonsense, every bit of it." "Are the Oompa Loompas really joking?" asked Charlie. "Of course they're joking," answered Grandpa Joe. "They must be joking. At least, I hope they're joking. Don't you?" And that is the end of chapter 17, Augustus Gloop Goes Up the Pipe. If you're like me, you might really hope they get to Augustus before he gets turned into fudge. But do you think Mr. Wonka would really let that happen? Now, if Augustus had not been drinking chocolate from the river, would this have happened to him? Or if he had stopped when his mom and Mr. Wonka asked him to stop, would he be in this predicament? Your job today is to let someone know that it's okay to eat, but eating to the point where you feel sick all the time is maybe too much, right? Take it from Augustus. He got stuck in that pipe from drinking chocolate out of a chocolate river that he wasn't even supposed to be touching. All right, so our chapter for later, chapter 18, is called Down the Chocolate River. So that will be our next adventure in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I hope you enjoyed the story about Augustus, and do not worry, he will come out all right in the end. All right, friends, I hope to see you next time as we continue our journey together through this story. Have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye.